Hello, welcome to Camelback Ventures Entrepreneurship Is panel, powered by CTIA Wireless Foundation. I'm Dori Kreiger, Executive Director of CTIA Wireless Foundation, and your moderator for today's conversation. In February, Camelback kicked off a year-long Entrepreneurship Is campaign to share the motivational stories of what propels Camelback Fellows and other phenomenal entrepreneurs to turn their dreams into reality. CTIA Wireless Foundation has been a long supporter of Camelback Ventures and is proud to help amplify the stories and voices of these undervalued funders who are creating positive social change and contributing to building livable and equitable communities across the United States. Today, I'm honored to be joined by some of these incredible founders. They include Camelback Fellows, Damola Ogundipe and Norma Parraz, as well as CTIA Wireless Foundation's Catalyst winners, Frazier and Betsey Mercado. I'm really looking forward to jumping into this critical conversation centered on conscious technology, specifically from the unique perspective of BIPOC and women leaders in the space. So before we jump into this, what is going to be an engaging conversation, let's get some quick introductions from our wonderful panelists. Norma, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you for the introduction, Dori. My name is Norma Parraz, and I'm the founder of Connecting Technologies. I'm based out of Phoenix, Arizona. Our tech innovation, EduKonekti, was designed to bring equitable and culturally inclusive communication frameworks in schools. Teachers and parents can now take over the influential roles they play at school by harnessing family engagement in the parents' primary language. EduKonekti is an innovation that reflects my personal story and journey as an immigrant by building a socially impact-driven tech venture. Now I work with schools to bring them culturally responsive solutions in many languages.
Thank you, Norma. Kai.
Dori, thanks for having me. So my name is Frazier. I'm the founder and CEO of KaiXR. KaiXR is a metaverse learning platform where kids get to explore virtual field trips and they can create metaverse makerspaces all from their classrooms. Pronouns are she, her, and I am located in Oakland, California, but I'm actually in Birmingham, Alabama, where I'm splitting time this year as we work with the schools in this area. And how I got into this, I had zero tech background, but as a classroom teacher, I wanted to make a learning platform that prepared my students for the future. And this was my love story back to my students, making sure they had what they needed.
Thank you, Kai. Betsey.
My name is Betsey Mercado. My pronouns are she, her. I am currently located near Seoul, South Korea. Our organization, Objective Zero Foundation, was created in 2016 after a 6-hour phone call between my husband and one of his soldiers that was suicidal and in crisis. And that phone call sparked the idea that the simple act of listening can save lives. I helped create the Objective Zero app and have been running Objective Zero for the last 5 years. And we support the military and veteran community, which includes service members, veterans, their families, and caregivers.
Thank you, Betsey. And rounding us out, Damola.
Hey everybody, my name is Damola Ogundipe, he, him pronouns. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Plural, formerly known as Civic Eagle. We are a political technology company. We provide data and software services to organizations that interface with government through public policy. So we help organizations across the country and really around the world monitor and keep track of legislation and regulations across a vast majority of policy spaces and policy issue areas. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you all for being with us today. Let's jump right into our first question. How are your conscious tech ventures making a positive impact in the undervalued communities you serve? And I'll ask each of you for your take on that. Perhaps, Norma, we start with you.
Okay. For our students and parents, EduKonekti is facilitating culturally responsive approach to reach academic excellence. Our tech tools provide strong engagement for all stakeholders with positive and consistent participation in academic activities and educational readiness. For our educators, we provide best practices with linguistic and culturally responsive accountability, training, including adopting cultural awareness and inclusiveness to support students and families.
Thank you. Kai.
Sure. I like to think of myself as the customers we try to serve. So as a classroom teacher, my school had very limited tech. We had a bring your own device policy. So we asked kids to bring their smartphones or their tablets to school because we didn't have that tech. We had struggle connectivity, so very few ways to connect to the tech. And my students rarely left their neighborhoods. So I wanted to make a platform that exposed my students to the world and tech that was responsive to their worlds, which is not the best connectivity, we couldn't afford the most expensive devices, but they still should have a chance to have hands-on opportunities to emerging tech so they're prepared for the future.
Damola?
Well, as we all know, laws govern us. When you look at underserved communities, often neglected, marginalized communities, they have the most they're impacted the most by bills, legislation, laws that are introduced, and oftentimes don't take them in mind or into consideration. So what we decided to do is we built a platform that takes all of the public policy, all of the legislation, regulations, things that actually govern us, that are really hard to understand, hard to reach, hard to find. And we added a level of intelligence to them so that they're easily discernible, easily findable, searchable, so that organizations that do a lot of the work interfacing with government on behalf of communities, particularly marginalized communities, have that information, have that data so that they can effectively change government and change the laws that govern us so that they're a little bit more engaging, a little bit more equitable. So we kind of go behind the scenes, right, with the work that we do and say, hey, we want to make an impact when it comes to how policies govern us and have an impact on us. And it just so happens that the communities that are the most impacted by legislation, by policies in a negative way, disproportionately negative way, are marginalized communities, but are underserved communities. So we've been able to have a lot of impact working with organizations that keep them in mind and that give them a voice.
Betsey, I'd love you to weigh in too.
We found that Objective Zero has impacted our communities in 3 different ways. First is we're reducing barriers to getting support by creating a platform for the military and veteran community to connect to peers and access mental health and wellness resources. We're also training our volunteers in suicide prevention practices so that they're aware of the signs that those in their life may be struggling or in crisis and how to act upon what that service member or veteran is going through. And then third, we're breaking down the stigma of seeking help, that seeking help is a sign of strength and not weakness. And those 3 things are really creating and contributing to our idea of functional zero, that a person's service is not a contributing factor to suicide risk, and then just generally contributing to lowering the rates of suicide in America.
Diversity in the tech industry, particularly in connection with BIPOC founders, continues to be a challenge. What do you think the tech industry can do to be more inclusive? Norma, I'll toss it to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I'm sure a lot of my co-panelists would agree with this, that we need to get an entry point. Give us capital, give us connections. We are, they need to see us as an investment into the future, addressing a fast-pacing demographic shift already, in the U.S. The U.S. is now, with just in the school systems, there's a demographic shift in the cultural and linguistic makeup of students enrollment in nationwide. Our classrooms across the U.S. are increasingly more racially, ethnically, and linguistically diverse, reflecting a transition from minority to majority. And so I just feel that they need to give us access. That's one of the pieces that I would ask.
Damola, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, for us, we're a venture-backed company. We've raised about $15 million to date, and that process of having to prove ourselves before every subsequent financing round we went out, where the metrics had to be in the top 90th percentile, and so on and so forth. Every time we went to raise, honestly, had a negative growth impact on us. Right, we couldn't think as long term as we wanted to. Because there were certain milestones and metrics that we needed to hit short term in order to go and get that next round of financing completed. And I think just providing more entrepreneurs of color, BIPOC entrepreneurs, with the same sorts of milestones and metrics that are afforded to our white male counterparts that are going on in the tech and entrepreneurship space. Would make a pretty big difference, right? So just looking objectively and saying, all right, all things being like truly equal, am I holding the founders that I am investing into the same standards when it comes to cutting a check? And that often isn't the case. And there's a lot of negative consequences that come from that, right? There's more dilution that entrepreneurs of color take on because of that. Financing rounds aren't as large, so that cuts runway. Because of that, so on and so forth. So even just getting involved in the conversation, being able to get a check cut and an investors to participate in a financing round, although that's usually obviously a good outcome, there's still negative consequences from that because of how we're perceived relative to white male peers. They get the benefit of the doubt a lot of times. That is something that could change, and I think another thing that could change and improve when it comes to diversity in tech and tech entrepreneurship is where those checks are coming from. We've done, I think, a really good job intentionally of having a diverse investor base that's not just tier one investors, like the traditional kind of institutional quote unquote tier one investors. We're finding angel investors that are people of color, finding firms and funds like Camelback that are led by people of color that really understand and get what we're doing and what we're about, where we can not only receive a check and have a good partnership as obviously entrepreneur / company to that investor, but also when we have a financial outcome, that money as an investor is going to go back. They're going to get a return. So also just supporting investors and funds that are led by people of color makes a really big impact because they are finding investments like Plural, formerly known as Civic Eagle, that are led by 3 Black founders, and that's helping with the diversity numbers. So again, truly thinking about not just writing a check, but holding the same standards that white founders are being held to, white male founders in particular are being held to, and then 2, making sure that if you are an LP, an institutional investor, that you're getting behind funds and firms that are ran by people of color.
I really appreciate those tangible steps that people can take towards equity. Kai, I saw your head nodding, affirming what both of your colleagues were saying. Do you have anything else to add?
No, just besides, it shouldn't be this challenging. There's a lot of great ideas. I'm a firm believer that those close to the problem are closest to the solution. But to get that access point to make a solution, it shouldn't feel like it's going to kill you to do it. And this journey, a lot of days, it feels like we are on our last breath trying to get it going, and shouldn't be like that. So just really echo what everybody else is saying.
I'm going to toss another question at the full group here. I'm curious if we have an investor or funder who is interested in diversifying their portfolio, or supporting more BIPOC or women founders, what do you all suggest in how that person could source ideas and explore funding opportunities? Damola, do you have any suggestions for someone who wants to change how they've been proceeding?
Yeah, I think getting out of your normal state of like networks and relationships that you built, right? We're all, tend to be comfortable in our networks, right? In our social status and settings. And it's pretty rare, honestly, to get out of that and be uncomfortable and just be like, oh, I'm going to go to this different networking event, or, leading into when somebody does make an introduction saying like, hey, like, I am in town, let's grab coffee and talk. Because I had this mutual person introduce us, and going out of your way to being intentional to do that. At the end of the day, everything is about relationships. And it does take energy. It does take intentionality. It does take thoughtfulness to say, hey, I'm going to invest in these relationships. Because it's not, as we all know, it's not as easy as saying, I met someone, here's $10 million into your fund, right? Or here's $5 million into your company. It is about building those relationships, and the checks come along the way, right? Those financing those transactions come along the way, that transactional relationship that are mutually beneficial. But it's about saying, hey, I'm going to make a decision that I'm going to meet 50 new people this year, and I'm going to, try to have multiple conversations with them and take them to lunch, or have them take me to lunch and meet them for coffee, or go to this networking event that I've, been invited to the last couple of years that I've never attended. Being that intentional about showing up, building those new relationships, investing in those new relationships, and seeing where they go as those relationships are built over time, is the way that you can strategically, intentionally take steps towards, making a difference.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I just want to
awareness and intention. Sorry, Kai. Go.
Oh, I just want to add, as being in a lot of the portfolios that I sit in, I'm usually the one of the only Black female companies in those portfolios. So for a lot of my investors, I have to have really blunt conversations about, I have other people you should talk to. Let me make introductions for you. Without that, we don't move the numbers. I think my stat is I'm like the 100 Black women to ever raise over $1 million in venture capital. I think we're now at about 150 Black women ever in the US. Those numbers shouldn't be like that at all. And a lot of that comes from, like Damola is saying, really reaching beyond your network, and it takes intentionality. There's not a lot of metrics around that. And there's not a lot of tracking about what's happening. So this change doesn't really happen about people being held accountable to reaching out beyond their own networks.
And can I add one more thing? Double down on what Kai just said, which is that, like, this isn't, charity, right? Like, the numbers speak for themselves. We have data points that show the more diverse your portfolio, the greater your internal rate of return is going to be, so on and so forth, right? You want to open the aperture of the deals that you have access to if you're a fund manager, or to the funds that you have access to if you're an institutional investor, or high net worth person that invests in funds, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a big opportunity that people need to grasp and take advantage of, and say, like, hey, this is mutually beneficial if I go out there and I expand the aperture, the scope of the people that are in my network, that I have relationships with, get out of my comfort zone a bit more, reach out to the person that Kai said, hey, you should talk to this founder, talk to this person, or talk to this investor, and say, hey, I should lean into that. So I just wanted to double down on what Kai said and just say, like, hey, this is good for everybody.
I'd like to jump in. And Dori, one of the things that I feel is that they're always saying, well, what else can we do? And there's low-hanging fruit for them. I mean, look at what you guys are doing at Catalyst, what Camelback is doing, and many others across the country. And we have an incredible pipeline of founders like us. And you have cultivated this, vetted us, filtered through many candidates, and opportunities. And so we are the pipeline. And so they just need to knock at the door. They already have people willing and ready to be, funded. This year, we opted not to do more funding rounds. We were exhausted. It's an exhausting game. And so I decided to just focus on our sales. And luckily, we've done really well. But that's how we got our bandwidth is just so limited, We're small startups. We don't have the, extra staff to keep doing the follow-ups, that are required in this investment sessions. And so we just decided this year we're going to go with clients, get more clients right now and delay funding at this point because it just requires so much time. But again, they know where we are. And it's just interesting that they won't go to the people that already vetted these candidates. I mean, we are here. And by the way, women BIPOC founders are the least invested in. We are probably at the 2 or 3% when you get to Latina, Blacks, and Native American. It just gets smaller and smaller. And so that's another issue that I think they need to open their eyes, that we're now dominating, half of the entrepreneurs in the country are women. Well, it's not reflected in the investments.
Well, I'm hoping that we're creating some awareness today, for sure, having this conversation. And I want to bring it back to the conscious tech part of your ventures. And Betsey, I wanted to ask this question of you, just as you're building the conscious tech and thinking about all the different options you had with Objective Zero Foundation, I'm curious why you chose wireless technology as an integral part of your solution.
For us, wireless technology allows us to reach people where they are. And for the veteran and military community, they're located across the globe. So when you have service members that are deployed to, obscure locations, they typically have access to Wi-Fi and a cell phone. And so having that easy to access and easy to reach tech was important. And also, wireless technology has really allowed us to differentiate ourselves from other organizations and existing organizations out there, like crisis hotlines and text lines. When someone reaches out for support, you often just get that first available person. And with Objective Zero, you can filter through our network of peer supporters and find someone most like you, someone that's been where you've been, done what you've done, and seen what you've seen. And we've seen that it builds that shortcut to trust because you're already on an equal playing field. You understand what each other has gone through and can support one another through the Objective Zero app.
Thank you, Betsey. Kai, what do you think about wireless and why that was so pivotal for KaiXR?
Sure. Thanks for asking, Dori. So metaverse technologies are going to play a big part in the future, but a lot of us lack an access point. So usually the issue is devices and connectivity. So to be in these metaverse spaces, you may need an expensive laptop, maybe a gaming laptop that costs maybe $2,500. You may need an expensive headset, another $500. And then once you have that, then connectivity is the issue. A lot of these devices, you need strong internet, high speeds. And the schools that we work with, some of the kids cannot afford lunch and the schools can barely afford school buses. When we get into Wi-Fi, that's not a thing. So we've had to be really strategic in partnering with groups like T-Mobile to provide hotspots depending on 5G as well. So with 5G, we're able to connect our customers where they are, whether they're using a laptop or a smartphone. And with that 5G, they can have high speeds. We can support a large number of connections, and we're able to take the tech to a lot of places where we can't normally go. For example, we have been working for 3 years with the juvenile detention centers in Houston, Texas. That's because we were able to fix a lot of the connectivity issues by using different hotspots that we continue to use now in different schools as well.
Thank you, Kai. Norma, when you think about the future and the intersection of social impact and technology, what sectors do you see having both the greatest opportunities for tech advancement and social change?
Well, we're already doing it in education, but I think that one of the fascinating things now is that innovation has really afforded and in some ways leveled the playing field for minority communities. And that is across every sector and industry. Now just in the news, right? Anything happens, people can respond in real time to things, and they don't have to have a lobbyist on their behalf, to do things and take charge. I mean, we've seen the news events across the country, and people are actively participating in many ways. But I think innovation has created that spot, position or platform for people to speak up, to become active, and active players, right, in their communities. And so that is true. And then also it is for our schools. We see, by the way, in the wireless, most of our parents may not have a computer at home, but they have a wireless phone. And that has been incredible. Over 80% of our families, parents at school, do not have computers. And so this is fascinating that they can conduct business with their phone in various ways. And so that has been really, really useful for us.
And Betsey, where you sit as a tech nonprofit, what do you see as kind of the opportunities for tech advancement and social change?
Thinking about this, I truly believe that any sector is an opportunity for tech advancement and social change. I think we have to remember that people are at kind of the heart of everything that we're doing. And so technology is the tool that we're using to drive the change, but it's the people. And so it's finding those people that want to make the world a better place, but having those opportunities and support to make their ideas and dreams into a reality. And then when we think about the technology and advancements, it's kind of that shiny new thing, everyone's wanting to use it. But I also think, taking new technologies and using them in new ways, or taking existing technologies and using them in new ways, like Objective Zero has done, just combining, the idea of the crisis hotline or text line, but using mobile app technology and merging those two together to create a platform for a specific vulnerable population.
And as we continue to think about the future and also look to the role of BIPOC and women founders, how do you see them playing a role in the creation of this future? Damola, I'm going to look to you first and then to Kai to weigh in.
Yeah, I'll kind of bridge the last question in this one.
Great.
So the sectors that I think where technology will create a bit of an accelerant, where we're going to see kind of like exponential change, because to Betsey's point, like technology is going to impact every single sector, but where I'm like, all right, where do I see exponential kind of change and transformation that like is a material impact on our day-to-day lives? I think it's healthcare and education, with healthcare being number one. And I think that as BIPOC founders, that there's an opportunity for us to be more engaged in those two sectors. Obviously, we could talk all day about the disparities around healthcare that exist, from racial disparities to socioeconomic disparities. But I think that AI will play a really big role in terms of transforming the way that like healthcare is not only delivered, but like how we understand like healthcare outcomes, how we make changes and apply interventions in the healthcare space, ranging from birth mortality rates and the disparities there, all the way to longevity, right? I think that we're going to be living longer. I think that there's a lot of applications that are being built and developed right now that give us a better understanding of how we can increase longevity. And I think that, again, is a pretty big material transformative change. And then that we as BIPOC founders need to be involved with and will benefit hopefully the most from, right, as those disparities start to shrink. And then the second is education, for much of the same reasons that I shared about healthcare. I think the way that our current education system, there's a lot of flaws, from our K through 12 public school education all the way to post-secondary. It's obviously high cost. The return is getting smaller and smaller based off of that cost. The disparities that exist, especially in K through 12 public school educations, from a racial and, again, socioeconomic perspective, is pretty crazy. And especially in certain states and cities that I won't call out, but y'all know which ones they are. But I think those are the two areas where we can see a lot of like transformational change through technology that will have a positive disproportionate impact on marginalized people and communities, as long as we're able to play a role in that development of that technology, right, and be involved in it, which I think we are more and more. And obviously, we have a forum like this to increase that involvement and that investment. But those are the two sectors that I see improving.
Kai, we're talking about education a lot. What do you think?
Yeah, I got all the education opinions, but I work in education. Most teachers are women, many are Black, and usually those who are making education tech companies are white males who've never stepped foot in the classroom. So with that being said, I really strongly believe that it's going to be teachers that make the change that we deserve in education. A lot of it's by honoring the profession of teaching and their expertise that they have, still echoing that those close to the problem are closest to the solution. So really tapping on people who have lived experiences in these fields so they know what it means for the technology, what change it's going to make in these institutions, in these classrooms, in the field of education. And when we have a lot of people with those lived experiences, those are the ones that are making solutions for marginalized communities. And when that happens, everybody wins. So once again, just ending my statement, I really believe teachers are going to be the ones, once we start making those pipelines, that are going to step up to the plate, and they're going to make the solutions that we all deserve.
Each of you are either BIPOC or women innovators and leaders in the technology space, building organizations from the ground up. In a few words, can you share what inclusive entrepreneurship means to you in this conscious tech and tech for good space? Norma, would you like to kick us off?
Okay. I really believe that we're reshaping, and just look in this panel, right? The women involved in creating change. And so I think slowly we are, making inroads in this space. I mean, whatever the industry that we're tackling, but just bringing our expertise, from a lived experience and harnessing the power of our, communities, our backgrounds. I think that is really going to transform things, because it really shows others, right, that we can lead, that we can be the innovators, and collaborate with them in multiple ways. And so I think we're making the right moves. But also I want to thank Camelback and Catalyst, because you guys are creating the pipeline for those women BIPOC innovators to take part. And so thank you for that.
Betsey, would you like to weigh in?
Sure. When I think about inclusive and entrepreneurship, it really is eliminating barriers to creating and building upon ideas. Anyone can have a good idea, but it really does take a lot of time, effort, and money to advance that idea. And so, to follow on, like organizations like Catalyst and Camelback Ventures and some of these accelerator programs, are building these opportunities for people that wouldn't otherwise have that support, whether it's financial, whether it's coaching, whether it's networking, to build upon our ideas and create change.
Kai?
Sure. So I want to bridge both these comments, and I want to make the pipeline go back even further. I think for real inclusive entrepreneurship, we got to involve kids. They're the ones that are thinking up companies right now. They have all the most amazing ideas that I couldn't even think of if I tried. But I didn't even know about entrepreneurship till I was probably in my 30s thinking about doing this. So we now in our metaverse classes teach kids about entrepreneurship, so they know that the things they're doing right now are entrepreneurial and how they can build on those things. A small example, I remember that when it used to snow, when I was a kid, I knew that I could shovel driveways and I could make $60, $5 a pop for each driveway. That's an entrepreneurial skill. I could, see opportunities, see a problem, make a solution, and make money to do things. We penalize kids who sell candy in school. That's, once again, entrepreneurship. So I really want to reach back to a lot of these kids and take the skills that a lot of them are being ashamed for, help nurture them and give them the tools they need to make an extended path line that starts as early as middle school.
Damola?
Yeah, I plus one to everything that Norma, Kai, and Betsey said. And I'll just add that, for me, inclusive entrepreneurship just is like removing as many barriers as we possibly can, as many friction points as we can. And some of that is happening through technology already, right? It's never been more easy. It's never been easier at any time in history to launch a technology startup. Not from a financing perspective, obviously, but from like building your first MVP, your first version, right? You've got a lot of tools that exist where you could just learn them on your own. You don't have to go through formal education to get credentialed. You can kind of build things. So just kind of removing kind of the next stages of barriers, post that. But, right now we've already seen that happen at the very first stage, right? If you want to build a technology product or a service and learn it and understand it and figure things out, you have access to be able to do that. And hopefully, as we continue to kind of like march down the inequities that exist at each stage of entrepreneurship, as you know, from launch to from first idea, like visualizing it, to getting your product or service in the hands of first customers, removing the barriers associated with that, to hiring and scaling, removing the barriers associated with that, so on and so forth. But I think we'll get there. So I think inclusive entrepreneurship is just removing the friction and the barriers that exist, particularly for people that are marginalized and have a history of marginalization in this country, so that they feel as included in the what I think is one of the greatest parts of America, which is the ability to build something from scratch. But we want everybody to be able to do that without restrictions or barriers.
So I have a follow-up question for all of you, thinking about just the expertise that you're bringing to this, right? And kind of the advice you would give to two different groups. One, groups of funders who are wanting to be more inclusive, wanting to build that pipeline. What could we be doing better or more of? And then I'm also curious about your advice to that person who does have an idea, who is thinking about a solution. Like, what's your advice to those two very different groups of folks, but also how they intersect? Whoever wants to jump in first would be great.
I'll jump in. So when people have an idea, I always tell them to start where you are, start with what you have, and start with what you know. So a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to do this, but I don't have, or I can't have, or I won't ever eat. So, and those are the barriers that really stop that idea. So I remind people, I made my first prototype for VR using a free version of Final Cut Pro. And that's how I was able to cut and edit and get that to be a thing. When I didn't have funding, I don't recommend this, but I had to learn what sacrifice looked like. So I sold my house, my car, everything I owned to get my first bit of money for my company. So sometimes it's starting with what you have and what you already know. I knew education. I didn't have money and I didn't have the tools. So I had to hustle very hard to make those things happen. And I encourage people also to look at their world right now and what they can do to start where they are. Once again, don't recommend having to do that. I hope the field changes, which is the other part of advice to funders and people like that. I want to come back and answer that later. I'll stop right there and I'll pass it over.
I want to add more on the funder side. I love for them to stop doing pitch competitions. I see them as beauty contests, and it's just terrible because it's a snapshot of the incredible work that is being done behind the scenes. And so I want them to get to know us, as entrepreneurs and our business, our operations, our impact in the community, and stop doing these rounds of pitch competitions because they're just not enough. And we're all, biting for the same crumbs in this kind of cycle of pitching, And so I think they need to get to know organizations and really devote intentional, like, Kai mentioned this and Damola, about really being intentional about where they're going to fund and look at those communities, look at the impact they can make, And so, get rid of pitch competitions.
Yeah. And I even just add to that, I usually tell funders that rarely am I asked, what do I need? I'm usually given like, here's this minority package of things that we think are going to help you. And a lot of times it does not help me achieve my goals. And it's kind of damning to what we're doing. So, and also a lot of these things are a one-off. So I've had some investors that have talked to me. It wasn't a good fit, but they kept supporting me, kept giving me emails, kept making intros on my behalf. So I think there's things that everybody can do. I've even had some funders that passed and came back at a later time. So I think really Norma is saying, I also feel very strongly about pitch competitions. But I think when I see my counterparts, they have the luxury of having meetings with investors. And the rest of us were scrapping on the stage, fighting for 5K, 10K. We could be very far along in our companies and we're still fighting for that same 10K. So it really, I was nodding my head so much earlier when Damola was saying that we don't get to think long term. We have to be in the top 90% to get even a meeting. And then we also have to we are not able to think big vision, where a lot of our counterparts, they think moonshots. I'm penalized for thinking moonshots. And I have a VR company that's already a moonshot. So I would love to see people asking us, what do we actually need? The best example I can give you is one of our investors, K4 Capital. It was a resounding, we needed therapy, because Norma said that it was exhausting to fundraise money. I found it traumatic to fundraise money. So that was the first time we were asked, what do we really need? And from the founders in that portfolio, we talked much about how that one change has helped us tremendously, so we can keep going in this journey, if you will.
I'll add from a funder perspective, both funding, if you're a funder that funds funds, and if you're a funder that likes to invest in companies and nonprofits, that type of thing. One is, don't just keep going back to the same well over and over again, right? To the same, Twitter feeds that are, directing you to the same people, and you're in the same bubble, right? Like, there's so many more people out there that are doing really cool things. Like, get out of that. It goes back to what I said earlier about building networks outside of your current network, and leading to that more and being more intentional about it. Two, stop, again, to the funders, stop over diligencing, stop over analyzing, right? Like, if you are a process oriented investor, that's fine. Lay out your process, and if there's a timeline associated with that, have that be clear. If you're more of a relationship building investor, build a relationship, make a decision. The over analyzing, the not being clear on timeline, can sink companies and can sink funds, and is demoralizing. And it disproportionately impacts, because y'all will take your time when it comes to diligencing Black and brown people, and it can be very exhausting and traumatic at times, like Kai said. So that's on the funder side. On the entrepreneur side, part of the question, not everybody's meant to be an entrepreneur. So it's okay if you're not. This is not the game for everybody. Your chances of failing are very, very high, and so people don't want to take that chance. So this whole this facade that we've created around how sexy it is to be an entrepreneur is not true. This is not a glamour sport. This is a gladiator sport, right? It's really, really hard to build something from scratch, and it's not meant for everybody. Also, when you go and work at a company, you think it's going to be all. It's not. Again, we've built, we're all play a role in this as entrepreneurs, and with the media, built this glamorization of starting a company and running a business and being part of a startup that just doesn't exist. It is tough, right? So this isn't meant for everybody. So you have to decide if that risk reward makes sense for you, because there's other ways to make change. It doesn't have to be you being an entrepreneur and starting something, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And so the second thing is, you have to, if you do decide that you want to be an entrepreneur and that this is what you want to do, all right, there's different levels to it, right? There's the ideation phase, and there's a level of credibility you have to have for that. So figure out what that, it's not credentialing. I feel like particularly women of color are always trying to over credential, and that's something that and BIPOC founders and male Black BIPOC founders as well, there is a whole thing around over credentialing that we have to, as a community, stop, right, and put an end to, because white men do not over credential. They just go and say fuck it and do it, and do things. But there is a level of credibility, right? Understanding of the ideation phase, what do you have to do to get something off the ground? What do you have to prove? So on and so forth. Then there's the actual building the company and entrepreneurship and all that kind of stuff. And then there's being a successful entrepreneur, all right, where you build something and makes money, it's product market fit, you're scaling, etc. And all three of those have a lot of different requirements that to create a level of credibility. So kind of understand the game as you launch into it, so that what exactly what game you're playing, right? Because there's written rules, there's unwritten rules, and you have to figure that out. So those are my thoughts on those two.
Thank you all for sharing. Betsey, would you close us out?
Sure. So when I think about the funding, your funding question, I once had a funder, we're in a nonprofit space, but I once had a funder ask me, who else should we be looking at? And I think it goes to what's been talked about earlier is, we're in this pipeline. We know what other organizations are out there. We're talking, we're using our network, we're understanding what each other faces. And so I think more funders can be asking, and investors, who else should we be looking at? Who else should we be investing in? I think that's what's really going to help create and drive more change. On the entrepreneurship side, as a social entrepreneur, not every venture needs to be a business. It can be a nonprofit and still see a lot of success and drive a lot of change. And going back to just networking, I think that's going to be your biggest advantage is the people in your network are going to connect you with others, and they're going to connect you with funders. They're going to connect you with investors, and they're also going to connect with people that can help amplify your impact and make those additional connections. So lean on your network, and then funders just ask us for who else they should be looking at in terms of funding.
Thank you. So many different themes during this entire conscious tech conversation. Certainly building awareness, proceeding with intentionality, and relationships, how critically important relationships are and how you go about creating them. Got the message on the pitch, the pitch awards piece. That one you all really nailed home. But I want to thank you. Thank you to all four of you for being so candid and for sharing your wisdom with us. I think it's been a really engaging conversation. I also want to thank Camelback Ventures for hosting this conversation. Thank you, Camelback, for doing this. Entrepreneurship is innovation, clearly, as you look at these fantastic four funders. I also want to say, if you want to learn more about Camelback Ventures and the Entrepreneurship Is, you can visit camelbackventures.org. And if you're interested in CTIA Wireless Foundation, you can find us at wirelessfoundation.org. Thank you. Thank you all for tuning in and listening to us today. Really appreciate it. A replay of this conversation will be available soon on the Camelback Ventures YouTube channel. Thank you.